In the last lesson, we looked at how we can create our own very simple HTML page. And at the moment, it really doesn't seem to do a whole lot. So I'm going to add in some more typically used elements. And the reason I say typically used elements is because there's a set of common elements that are used within any website. But with HTML, you don't actually need to use them. And really at the end of the day, you don't even actually need to have any of this information here, any of these elements. If you simply were to type hello world or something like that and save it as an HTML document, when you go to your website, it's actually going to render out exactly as you'd expect it to. Just write out hello world, and that's because the browser is actually smart enough to understand that HTML, and it's going to actually look for those elements and the tags that are typically within HTML, but if it doesn't find them, it's going to understand that, well, this is what maybe was intended to be done here, and it's going to try to do its best to render that out. So really, this is why I say that you don't necessarily need to include it, but in web page structure, you should include it. So and this goes for a lot of the stuff here that we're doing within a website. So you see that most websites, we've got a lot of this information up here. So here we've got some information here that's looking to see if it's Internet Explorer 9, and if it's not in Internet Explorer 9, or if it is Internet Explorer 9, then it's going to render out some additional tagging information. And this kind of stuff is done in order to help facilitate the different types of legacy browsers. Especially with Internet Explorer, there's always been a lot of problems with Internet Explorer and how it actually gets rendered out within modern web browsers. So let's jump into our HTML code, and I'm going to show you how to add in some typical HTML code. So typically with your HTML element, and we saw that even it understood that we didn't necessarily need to specify a language, but you always want to try to add enough information for the browser to be able to accommodate that and actually render it out in the way that you're intending to render it out. And that's why a lot of times we're going to include HTML language equals EN, and so this is because this web page is going to be actually language of English. We've also got character set. So the character sets, there's different character sets that the browser can interpret from the character codes and render them out differently. So for English language, and typically you're going to see UTF-8. So that's going to be the character set. And another thing that you're going to see typically when you look over here within your tabs of your open windows, we've got the titles showing. So this is another one that you really should include, and especially for SEO, so that's search engine optimization purposes, you should always include a title, and the title should be relevant to the content of the web page, and your titles should all be different. So every page that you have should have a different title. So I'm going to just give it a title here, the course on web dev. And also, we also have some additional meta tags that you're going to see included very commonly into websites. And these are going to be meta. So we've got meta, when we're using brackets, we've got a drop down here. So we've got meta keywords, meta description, meta author. So a lot of times I'm going to usually include the description and the author. And of course, you could include keywords as well, but this is not going to be as utilized as maybe it once was within SEO purposes. But although the description typically isn't supposed to get utilized by Google, it actually does when you go into your search. When you search for a web page, a lot of times they're going to actually use the description within your meta information. So this is a good place where you can actually place some info about your website. So you can place some customized information about your website there. And I'm just going to hide this side window and make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it being presented. And I just got to add in that closing. So these are self-closing tags. So we've got an opening and closing, and we've got our self-closing here, and we can also do a slash like that as well. So also the other one that I usually like to include is meta name, and this one is going to be author. And then again, the content is going to be presented by the content attribute. So I'm going to just write the name of my company here, so Discovery VIP, as the author of this content. And so this is usually all that a basic template would need in order to create a basic HTML page. And there's a few other points that I want to still run through. So you do see that sometimes people include these style tags. So opening and closing style tags, and then within here is where you include your CSS for your actual web page. And when you do it this way, when you include on-page styling like this at the top, so this is only going to be relevant to this particular website. And a lot of times you're going to find you're building out websites and you're actually going to need to reuse the same styling over and over again. And the best way to do that is actually to link to a style sheet. So we present the tag link, we do rel, and we specify that this is going to be a style sheet, and then we just do an href. So I'm not sure why that went over to the next line, but we do style sheet and we do href, and we equal that to the link to our style sheet. So I'm going to create a brand new style sheet, and I'm just going to call it style CSS. And this is the same thing that's done for JavaScript as well. So sometimes you'll see that JavaScript is included at the top. Sometimes it's just before the body closes. And my preference is usually to place the JavaScript at the bottom here, just before we close off the body tag. And the reason being is that this gives us an opportunity to load the contents of our body content. And what happens when your web page loads is that your browser reads through this code and it generates what's called a document object model. And JavaScript's actually able to patch into that document object model and manipulate your HTML. So this is why a lot of times you'll see it included at the bottom. And also, just like CSS, we can link out to a source. So now we just do JavaScript and we do source. And here we just link out to the JavaScript file. And we see that we do the opening and closing. So this is different than CSS because we actually do have to include that closing script tag. And much like with the CSS, the good thing about linking to an external file is that now I can reuse this JavaScript over and over again on multiple pages within my website. All I have to do is continue to link over to that page and utilize the JavaScript that is available within this file. And we see one other thing here important to note. Whenever we create CSS style sheets, we call them .css, and JavaScript is .js. And that's how the browser understands that these are the files and this is what it's going to be expecting to render out with this file. So let's save this file, open up our browser, and take a look and see what's going on here. So we don't actually see anything being rendered out, but when we look at the source code, we've got all our source code and it's all ready to go in order to build out our customized website from scratch. So we're ready to start adding in our HTML tags and building out the structure of our website, and then applying some CSS to make some nice styling effects and customize the way it's going to look and feel, and then JavaScript for some dynamic interaction. So we're all ready to go. In the next lesson, I'm going to add in some, and we're going to start going over some of the typical HTML elements. So that's coming up in the next set of lessons.